Kia.
Good, how are you? Yeah, today you will be really busy. After this session, you will go to tour.
Yeah.
Finally.
Two sessions for this
Yeah.
and one this afternoon
Yeah.
for film.
So you prefer to sit on the podium? On the
I didn't tell
stage?
me that the panel is staying here, so
Yeah, but actually, if you would like to sit,
no, no, no. You propose me to sit on the podium. You are alone on the podium. Okay.
yeah. Oh,
Got a bit stuck outside,
yeah, yeah,
but I
yeah.
think majority is still outside.
Did you have some coffee and snacks? Ah, that's
You guys don't mind the rain? No, nobody else.
this panel so far.
It's not so much. Did you say if I get the question? Have you been taking some notes? Okay, very good.
You are, yeah.
Yes, facilitator. All in one.
right button, the silver one. Hello. Welcome everyone to this breakout session. We would like to start. Maybe some people will still come in later, but to have sufficient time to discuss and exchange, I would actually like to open this session. I would also like to invite you to come up front to all of those that sit in the back, because actually this is supposed to be a very interactive session. We would like to exchange with you. We would like to hear your contributions and questions, so don't be shy. First rows are still available, so please feel free to come. My name is Ellen Michel. I'm working for GIZ Pro Klima, that is implementing different projects in partner countries on green cooling, and at the same time I'm also heading the Secretariat of the Climate and Ozone Protection Alliance. That is a member-driven alliance consisting of members, country representatives, but also private sector, academia, civil society, and financial institutions. And this alliance is working on the topic of holistic, sustainable management of ODS and HFC banks. And therefore, this topic is very close to my heart, and I'm happy that now we have the chance to go more in depth than we had in the opening session already. This session is focusing on recovery, recycling, and reclamation. So if that is what you're interested in, you're in the right room. There's also the chance to participate in the other sessions this afternoon. And looking into those 3 R's, as you all know, of course, recovery is the first step for reusing refrigerants, followed then by either recycling or reclamation or destruction, but that's in the other working group, in the other session, depending on what are the refrigerant properties, also what are the equipment requirements, and also what is their supporting infrastructure. We will focus here and exchange with you on the availability of recovery cylinders, on the quality control requirements, also on advanced recovery technologies. And we will also look into the importance of, it was touched upon in the morning session, reverse supply chains to manage the return and reuse of cylinders. And we will also see and listen to the challenges and hopefully also solutions to overcome those regarding technical, economic, and logistical barriers. And we will also hopefully hear some existing policies and programs on how to deal with those challenges. Before we start and before I will hand over to our opening speaker, I would just like to share with you 2 quotes which I thought are quite suitable for this session. Since we're talking about recycling, let's say in the wider area, one thing is, the first quote is from Annie Leonard, who's a proponent of sustainability. She's saying, there's no such thing as a way. When we throw anything away, it must go somewhere. So obviously, in our case, we don't want this somewhere to be the atmosphere, refrigerants to be vented, but actually to be properly treated. And the second quote also, to start out with, if it can't be reduced, reused, repaired, rebuilt, refurbished, refinished, resold, recycled, or composted, then it should be restricted, should be designed or removed from production. And this is from Pete Seeger, folk singer and social activist. And I think this is really also along the lines of the Montreal Protocol and the Kigali Amendment. We have restrictions, we have international regulations, but at the same time also, please keep in mind there are alternatives, there are natural refrigerants existing for many applications, so to avoid something which actually cannot be composted, as our refrigerants, that is probably a very good way forward. So with that, I would like to hand over to Elvira. Elvira Nigido is a member of the task force that was established by the TEAP on life cycle refrigerant management and has contributed significantly to the report, which you have all been given to, and which is the basis for this workshop today. She's working for AGAS, and she has almost 3 decades of experience in life cycle management of ODS. She is currently the Group Sustainability Manager for AGAS, and she has also been already in various UNEP TEAP task forces. And she holds degrees in environmental sciences, environmental management, and business management, and she will do the opening presentation for us to then continue and start our discussions. Evia, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Can everybody hear me okay? Yeah? Excellent, thank you. So today's session is on recovery, recycling and reclamation. Myself, my colleague Lauren Allen will be leading the session and presenting, and then we'll be calling on the audience to provide feedback, ask questions so we can further elaborate on this very important topic. So just very high level overview of what I'd like to touch on this morning. So really important are the definitions around recovery, recycling and reclamation, the importance of refrigerant recovery, effective refrigerant recovery for recycling and reclamation, obstacles and challenges, touching on some policies and drawing a couple of conclusions. So under the Montreal Protocol, we do have actual definitions on each of these terms, and what you're seeing on the screen are the definitions taken out of the protocol handbook. So when we are referring to recovery, we're meaning the collection and storage of controlled substances from machinery, equipment, containment vessels, etc., during service or prior to disposal. Recycling, on the other hand, refers to the reuse of the recovered controlled substance, following a very basic cleaning process, such as filtering and drying. And for refrigerants, recycling normally involves recharging the product back into the equipment it came out of, and it often occurs on site. Reclamation, on the other hand, means the reprocessing and upgrading of a recovered controlled substance through mechanisms such as filtering, drying, distillation, and chemical treatment to restore the substance back to the specified specification or a standard of performance. And it often involves processing off-site at a central facility. One thing that we're continuously learning and discovering more is that the largest opportunity to recover refrigerant comes from the equipment at its end-of-life phase. The importance of refrigerant recovery, and it was also touched on this morning, but essentially, recovery is the first step before recycling or reclamation, and I'm just going to briefly touch on destruction, can occur. Without recovery, none of those subsequent processes can happen. We know it doesn't we know it's not very high, that it remains low in many A5 and non-A5 parties, and that once refrigerant is recovered, it can be reused after either recycling or reclamation. Recovery supports the circular economy by reducing the need by reducing the need to produce new refrigerants, which presents a significant opportunity to minimise emissions and their potential impact on the environment. Reusing recovered refrigerant does not count towards Montreal Protocol consumption targets and can be used as a tool towards compliance. So what's effective refrigerant recovery for recycling and reclamation? What does that look like? Recovery for reuse requires a change in behaviour at scale so that we're preventing and reducing the amount of refrigerant that's being emitted to atmosphere. We can do that by comprehensive and continued technician training, enabling access to refrigerant recovery machines and equipment, establishing a reverse supply chain, logistics and infrastructure that enables sufficient access to cylinders, cylinder tracking, recovery equipment, collection networks, storage facilities, so that the refrigerant can be returned for recycling, reclamation or destruction. We need to ensure that there's sufficient time for the technicians on the ground that are physically doing the recovery to be feasible. That time needs to be compensated for. Access to chemical analysis to know the composition of the refrigerant for potential reuse. The financial mechanisms to support responsible recovery. And then the policy frameworks, whether they're regulatory or voluntary, that incentivise recovery. And a lot of these elements are all interrelated and complementary to each other. Just going to touch on some of the obstacles and challenges that the task force report identified, and also that in this morning's session, when we were learning and hearing about various countries' experiences, what they have seen. From an economic perspective, we've got economic accessibility and policy obstacles and challenges associated with effective recovery for recycling and reclamation. In some countries, we've seen refrigerant phase-outs and phase-downs creating complex market dynamics. And they range from an oversupply because of stockpiling of product prior to or even early in advance of phase-downs, or if there are a significant number of excess allowances relative to demand, so therefore creating a lot of headroom, which then results in weaker incentives to detect leaks and recover for reuse and reclamation. And often the costs of undertaking those activities are higher than the cost of purchasing new refrigerant. So therefore, that incentive isn't so attractive. Stringent phase-down schedules may also increase new refrigerant pricing. So therefore, the market responds to that by shifting to alternatives and enhancing LRM practices. And in some cases, as we're familiar with and we've seen, we have high pricing, which then unfortunately drives illegal trade, therefore also impacting the attractiveness of recovering for reuse and reclaim. Fluctuating refrigerant prices may make it difficult to justify capital investments in recovery, recycling and reclamation, and the reverse supply chain infrastructure. From a technical perspective, we know there are technologies that are available for recovery, recycling and reclamation, but more often than not, depending on location and geography, accessibility is very difficult and challenging, and that might be attributable to the size of that economy, the market conditions, and the geography. When technologies are broadly available and accessible, technical improvements may still be needed to make those 3R processes more efficient and cost effective. A couple of examples where we face some technical challenges and disposable cylinders, otherwise known as non-refillable cylinders, which again was touched on this morning. There's plenty of those around. They're still used in many countries. However, the challenge there is when that disposable cylinder is used, the contents are used, or the liquid contents are removed, there's a vapour hill that remains behind. Those cylinders are designed for one-time use. They get disposed of. They may be thrown into landfill or dumped, unfortunately. So then what happens to that vapour hill left in the cylinder? It will just leak to atmosphere. Other technical issues relate to equipment itself, unsuitable recovery equipment, recycling or reclamation equipment. So not able to remove all the impurities, not able to pull a full vacuum on the cylinder or the containment vessel. So therefore, again, you've got that remaining heel or vapour left in the cylinder. Inadequate supply of empty recovery cylinders. So touching on that reverse supply chain. How do we provide access to cylinders and containment when technicians have to go out into the field and remove the product from equipment? And then we've got issues around contamination of the actual recovered refrigerant. So a lot of the time that might be attributable to technicians mixing different types of refrigerant in the one cylinder. So we end up with a cocktail of product. And then education, training, awareness. There's still a lot of room to build on those key elements. And then further to that, quality, understanding that the composition and the quality of the product prior to recycling and reclamation, having that knowledge of what that looks like will then determine the level of reclamation that may be required. And then once the product is reclaimed, well, how do we know that we've done a good job? How do we know that we've returned that product back to the necessary standard or even commercial agreement between entities regarding quality? So if we don't have access to laboratories or even refrigerant identifiers, that quality question will remain. I'm going to elaborate a bit more on the quality aspect of reclaim, because one of the things that we've discovered during our LRM task force was that there is a lot of hesitancy in some industries or countries around the world on not wanting to necessarily use reclaimed product because of a perception that it is inferior, or in some cases it actually is inferior because of the limited access to laboratories that can perform that type of analysis to give that certified result. So lab analysis, as I've said, it actually determines contamination and composition. A lot of the refrigerants that are in the market have multiple components. They're not single component refrigerants. So during the reclamation process, we need to be making sure that we're getting the ratio of composition correct. Lab analysis may not be readily available, so therefore access is limited. And then in situations where companies are claiming to reclaim and then putting their claimed product on the market, that product may not actually meet specifications, so therefore they're not really guaranteeing that product. On the recycled side, we know that from time to time, and it does happen, it can be reused without testing. However, we need to be careful that the system's performance isn't compromised because of the potential inferior quality of recycled product. If it's not done correctly, it can introduce contaminants. Some equipment manufacturers avoid using reclaimed refrigerants over concerns with quality, and that's because of their fear and concern around equipment warranties being voided or compromised if the product isn't to the right spec. But then on the other hand, we've actually got situations where manufacturers will use reclaimed product in your equipment. And then what I'd like to stress is the importance of standards and specifications, that when we're going through that reclaim process, at the end of the day, we've got certainty that the reclaimed product does meet a recognised standard or a commercial arrangement regarding quality. Moving on to policies that promote recovery, recycling and reclamation. We've got a number of mandatory and voluntary policies around the world that target the 3 Rs and that are being implemented. However, we also know that there's been inconsistency in implementation. You know, we've got situations where the policies are not advanced, they may be basic, or in some cases, not overly existent. But saying that there are lessons that have been learnt from the varying policies that have been successful. We know that enforcement can be very challenging due to the large volume of end users, distributors and independent contractors that are involved in the supply chain. We know that effective LRM requires stakeholder support, and again, that was reinforced during this morning's session with the countries, that we still need that strong engagement with industry, with stakeholders that are on the ground, that understand the dynamics of that country and that market. In particular, when we're trying to establish that reverse supply chain, we need to know who the players are and how we can get that product back. We need to look at voluntary actions, compliance, offset generation, incentivising, and corporate citizenship programs are equally important. And then safe handling and transport of refrigerants must also be considered. So this morning, Hilda touched on the definition of waste and how, depending on that definition, can either create barriers to the movement of product in order to access reclamation technologies, for example. So by eliminating certain obstacles, we're going to open up the doors to more access, specifically in countries where they don't have reclaim or they don't have access to laboratories. So therefore, by removing those obstacles to transboundary movement, we're going to create more opportunity for access. Just in conclusion, recovered refrigerants can be reused as recycled or reclaimed. Reusing refrigerants through those processes presents a significant opportunity to prevent potential emissions. However, those benefits can be negated if recovery doesn't occur at all. Remember, recovery is the first step. Effective recovery for reuse requires a big change in behaviour at scale and financial investment to stop venting to atmosphere through complementary mechanisms such as training, suitable recovery equipment, establishing a reverse supply chain, access to laboratories, access to financial mechanisms, including things like carbon markets, and the implementation of appropriate mandatory and voluntary policy frameworks. Expanding current financing mechanisms, implementing policies may reduce some of the cost challenges linked to implementing effective LRM, in particular in A5 countries. But at the end of the day, my closing remarks are that we all need to work together, parties and the private sector, companies, contractors, technicians and end users need to be engaging, working together to address this really urgent climate emergency. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Elvira, for pointing out, let's say, the most important elements of this RRR concept and the different elements attached to it. Before I open up to the floor, allow me one follow-up question to the presentation, maybe to also encourage then discussion. You were highlighting the importance of recovery as a basis, obviously, to then continue follow-up activities. So would you have a suggestion which type of incentives can actually encourage the stakeholders to adopt recovery practices?
Thank you. One thing that I'd like to point out, which in my view is very obvious, is that every country has its own unique set of circumstances. So we're not going to have a one-size-fits-all. It's very much tailored to the market conditions and the overall situation of that country. So incentives may need to be driven by changes in regulation. They may need to be driven by supporting programs. They may need to be driven by reliance on financial mechanisms like voluntary carbon markets, for example. So before we even start any real recovery, we need to go back to what does the inventory look like in that country? That's got to be the starting point. If we don't know what's in the installed bank or base, we can't then strategically and practically put a plan together, knowing what's happening in that country, or more importantly, what's not happening and addressing those gaps.
Thank you, Avia. And we have one more distinguished expert here on the panel that you may also address your questions and comments to. This is, let me introduce Laurent Gauguin. He is also a member of the task force for LRM, and besides that, he's working for ClimaLife. He has also more than 30 years working in the field, in the sector. He's a circular economy and public affairs manager with ClimaLife, and he promotes, in particular, good practice by training on different levels for technicians, for managers of private companies, but also for public authorities. We heard about the importance of cooperation. And he's also president of ADC3R, the French Association of Distributors, Fillers, Recovery and Reclamation, and also some other functions, but I will not mention them all here now. Laurent, from your experience, what are the major barriers to scaling up reclamation activities, and if you can shed a light especially for low volume consuming countries? And would you have an advice on which national policies or maybe also international support mechanisms could help to overcome these challenges? And then I really open up to the floor.
Thank you, Ellen. Thank you, Elvira. Yeah, first of all, we have to understand that all the refrigerant, recovery refrigerant, can be reclaimed. There is no barrier to reclaim the blends of refrigerant for blend HFCs, blend HFCs, HFOs. There is no issue to reclaim it. It's very important to understand it. But the key for the reclamation of the recycling, the waste of refrigerant, I speak of waste because in France it's the recovery product are waste. I'm sorry. The key to recycling and reclaim, it's a selective collection. As Elvira said, that if the products are mixed in the same cylinders, we have a cocktail of of components. We have a cocktail of substances, and it's not possible to have a simple reclamation of the product. I speak about simple reclamation of the product. If we take out the non-condensable gases, the impurity like oil, scraps, etc. It's a simple reclamation because you have the same refrigerant in flow in than the flow out. If you have a cocktail, you have to separate them, the substances, and it's very expensive regarding the destruction or the other. So it's a big barrier, it's a selective collection, and for the selective collection, you have to take the good practice, and you have to have to convince all the actors of the sector that it's not a constraint, the LRM. It's an opportunity to change the business model, to change the leaks or refilling the equipment are not a fatality. You have to change this. The refilling the equipment is not a business. But maintenance and servicing, maintenance of the equipment, to have a good maintenance, to have a leak prevention, etc. You avoid energy consumption, you avoid direct emission, you avoid everything. So the LRM, global LRM and the RR, it's very important to change, and it is an opportunity, it's not a cost.
Okay, thanks for pointing that out. So, I would like to open the floor to all of you here. Please feel free to raise your hands if you have either questions, comments, or if you would like to share also your experiences in your respective countries, organizations, companies. I will take a few questions at a time, and then, or contributions, and then we'll answer them combinedly. I see first Hyacinth from Cameroon.
Thank you very much, Madam. Thank you for two presenters. I happened to miss the first presentation, but the second is so very interesting to me. I have a couple of questions, but I want to highlight that what she actually presented as challenges. We see there are very the economic and the technical aspect of challenges is what we are facing every day. I don't want to go enumerate as you did in your presentation. One of the issues that we have most of the time, especially for recycling, is to ensure the customers or those the technicians to convince those who are the technicians that what they are recycling, what they have as product is best. But if you remember, like we just said, I remember the information that we got from the other presenter was talking about the issue of blend. Now, when we're talking about blend, that's an issue now when you have to recycle the blend. How do you ensure the quality of it? That's one question I want to have. And then I go back to the issue of we're talking about the reclamation. And we were talking about having standards for the country. First of all, they are not even sure of the standards. And I don't know, there's no lab that we may start going by that, thinking of a lab, then no attributes now. Most of the time they do is when they recycle, they just maybe sell it. We need the whole mechanism that if I follow a presentation, I need to ensure that once you recycle, you take it to a lab to ensure the quality test before they come by. But that's not what's happening most of the time, especially for E5 countries. Now, how do you advise? How do you advise us to go ahead? Because it's an issue to really convince. We know very well the economic aspect, but they'll tell you it's better for them to buy a virgin than to go for a recycled refrigerant. Now you need a lot of you need to reconvince them economically. They don't see it, but they see the immediate gain they will get. So I just want to I'm interested in this aspect to see how we can convince them and because the issue of policy, we propose policy that they want to implement. But once from the start, they are not aware, they don't want to get into that aspect. How do we do? Because you need to create an enabling environment to ensure that the actors, the stakeholders, mostly the technicians, will be able to ready to grab that technology. Well, let me give you the experience of Cameroon. We are actually taken, prepare a logbook. It's business logbook where we train technicians. You register all what you collect, maybe like anything, and then we tell you that if you collect, maybe for recycling, you can make this amount of money. But we need to go back to ensure that they are following up. Even at that level, they are very timid. Please, I want to be more solid advice on this aspect so that we can really maybe take on this aspect. It's very interesting. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I collect some more questions. Yes, please.
Senegal. Good morning, everybody. Thank you very much for this session and the presentation. In the morning, during the presentation, it is mentioned that the technology are available, but not accessible for Article 5 parties. There is one open question regarding the recovery, recycling, reclamation, destruction. Do you have lesson learned on the previous management plan? I think it's very important to do these exercises before we move ahead on recovery, recycling, reclamation on LRM for our countries. Thank you.
Thank you. And Bettina?
Thank you very much. I'm Bettina Schlecker, consultant with the COPA project. Elvira, you mentioned the largest opportunity for recovery is at the end of life phase. How can we advise Article 5 countries to capitalize, to incentivize this aspect?
Yes?
Hi, I'm an observer from China, and I'm aware that there is one recent concerns about especially reclamation of refrigerants, like especially the reclamation of HCFCs and HFCs that are currently being phased down and phased out. This reclamation and reuse would somehow prolong the usage of these substances. And the major concerns is that especially without leakage prevention in place, this would somehow goes against the initial intention of the phase down and phase out. So my question is that would you foresee would you see that there will be some future bans or restrictions on the usage of reclaimed substances as well? Yeah, that's it.
Thank you. So I think we start with answering, and then we'll go for... I'll take you in the second round, okay? I'll focus on this side. Sorry. Okay. And I invite both speakers to answer accordingly. So I think we had questions regarding challenges on how to convince technicians and how to ensure quality. Also, what do you advise if the labs are not there yet, or maybe also very expensive, and also if there's limited awareness from the beginning? Maybe let's start with that.
Yeah, thank you. The only, well, not the only way, a significant way that we're going to get more incentive for recovery, for reclamation, is that a value is placed on reclaim. If the price of virgin is a lot less than the price or the value placed on reclaim, why would a technician bother? That will be their mentality. So it's all got to do with the value that's placed on reclaim. Until there's that financial value, there's no incentive. So how do we drive that value? Each country needs to look at its own unique set of circumstances and where they're at during their phase down journey. We've got examples around the world where there have been mandates, regulatory mandates. For example, in California, they've got their mandate for 15% virgin. And so therefore, the use of reclaim is governed by the fact that you can only limit the amount of virgin product. So therefore, as an industry, you've got incentive, you've got that driver to force that change. So therefore, recovery becomes more important. So countries need to look at their own unique circumstances and adopt something that will provide more, that will make reclamation more attractive. In relation to accessing laboratories so that we've got more quality assurance around reclaim, the reality is this: we're not expecting that each country is going to have a full laboratory setup, because that's very expensive. To be able to test reclaim refrigerant against standards, for example, AHRI 700, that's the standard specification for reclaim product, which is equivalent to the quality of virgin product. You need gas chromatography, you need moisture titrators, you need a host of equipment that will enable you to do that testing. Then you need people that are trained in how to use the equipment, that are trained in the methodologies to perform these tests. So that's very expensive. So going back to the question of, well, how do we do that? How do we access that? Well, maybe countries in particular, depending on where they're located, need to regionally come together and have a regional centre. And earlier on I touched on the limitations around transboundary movement. So the Basel Convention, unfortunately, and depending on how countries classify their refrigerant, can be a prohibitor. If we could just eliminate that or come to a common understanding or agreement on how we classify these products globally the same way, that would eliminate, in my view, a lot of the issues. So going back to the laboratory, if we've got a centralised laboratory in a region, countries that need to send samples, that movement of even samples from country A to country B, if you take away the Basel Convention, you're going to facilitate that movement. So you're going to access the laboratory that's got the expertise and the know-how. But saying that, it doesn't mean that every kilogram of product that is reclaimed, you're sending a whole heap of samples. Obviously, you will need to set up a program within your own country, get that level of assurance, and then lean on that to get your outcome. Because there's also cost involved. So there are practicalities. Whatever the approach taken needs to be practical and pragmatic, because there are lots of costs involved, and it is a challenge to get things and to move things around in order to access reclamation, recycling, laboratory for reuse. There was a question, I think, around the ban on the use of reclaim as well. Yeah. Look, I don't have a view on the ban, and whether that ban would ever occur. That's something that at the country level needs to be determined by what the supply and demand situation is and the availability of the lower GWP alternatives. As technology changes with respect to low GWP, we might see a movement away from reclaim because we're going to have more lower GWP products available on the market that are suitable and fit for purpose. Thank you.
Thanks, Abiad. Laurent, do you want to take the question from Senegal regarding accessibility to technologies?
Yes, for accessibility of technology that Elvira just said, that miniaturization of the country with low quantity, it's important to arrive to increase the quantity, to arrive to use the laboratory, to arrive to use the equipment, etc. It's possible to do that, but it's possible also to work and to have an agreement on private and public sectors to develop the different equipment and to develop the different access to the product. But first of all, before accessibility and before the reclamation and to know the laboratory, etc. We have to work step by step. If the technician knows the life of the installation, the life of equipment, he knows more or less the quality of the recovery product. And it's very important also to that. And to recycle the refrigerant, he knows the life of the equipment. So, more or less, he knows the life of the refrigerant. Could be impurity, like oil, moisture, etc. But normally, if he following the equipment since the beginning, he knows that there is no other product inside, so he can recycling the product. After, it's better to have analyze, it's true, but step by step, if you have no access, you can develop some alternative solution for the basic reuse product. It's important to have this. And regarding the recycling and unreclaimed product, for the reclamation, you have an analyze, you know exactly the composition. And reclamation, it's always higher price than virgin product today. And that's an issue. That's why we have to put in incentive to interest the technician. Today, for them, it's a cost. With incentive, we give a value of their job to recover. So it's important also to understand that we have to change our mind about the cost to the cost to a new business model on the recovery. You arrive to do that for copper. You arrive to do that for materials, etc. Why not for refrigerant? It's the same. It's the same. The cost of refrigerant in one equipment is less than 8% of the global cost of the equipment. That's why today, in the past, refrigerant are not considered to be reclaimed or recycling. But it's also important to do that. So if you put incentive to give a value to the job of the technician, to give a value to the job of the contractors, you arrive to develop the recovery and the selective recovery. Mutualization could be done with all the actors of the sectors. Example, if you put a license for the virgin product in your country, you can have a mutualization with the different actors with a license to develop an equipment for the reclamation and to the analyze. It's also a possibility. But it could be also a mutualization with the different actors of the sectors, contractors, end user, distributor, etc. And for example, some country put a fee on the virgin product to finance the equipment for the reclamation and the recovery job. So mutualization is not only on the country, it's also inside the country, inside with the different actors of the sectors.
Did we cover the question from Bettina?
It's incentive. Yes, incentive could be done by the different actors if you have license and on the product, and with a mechanism on phase down or phase out of the different system, the distributor could put an incentive to take back the waste and reclaim, to have a second life on the recycling or reclaimed product. But it could be at the level of the country also, like some country down that it's a paid license for the virgin product and pay back to the contractors if they return the waste. There is different possibility, depend on the country. In my opinion, it's only my opinion, voluntary agreement on all the actors and also with the public sector, it's more efficient than only restriction and monetary. But it's my opinion.
Okay. Thank you for your.
I have a question from China, but I forget it.
I think Elvira already touched on it. It was the question of the future of using reclaimed substances. I'll open again. Yes, please, go ahead, the floor.
Oh, thank you. My name is Claudia Paratori. I'm the ozone officer of Chile. And we have 4 reclaiming centers. The first one was established on 2017. It was the pilot center. And last year we implemented 3 new ones. So we have a lot of lessons learned. And I have some questions, comments, concerns about your presentation. One is that when the equipment arrived to the reclaiming center, they do not have any refrigerant. But the companies usually ask for contract to take all the equipment, some refrigerant, cylinders with refrigerants, and one of the main challenges of the reclaiming plants are how to manage the equipment. The second point is regarding to how to reclaim refrigerants which are zeotropic blends. Just this year we had to export for destruction to France some metric tons of zeotropic blends because the reclaiming plants do not have the sufficient technology to reclaim that kind of blends. And the third point is regarding to laboratory analysis. In a reclaiming plant, they need to deliver the analysis immediately, or at least within the day. And in my country, the chemical analysis is not implemented. This is not unusual chemical analysis. The usual analysis are water, soil, air, but not refrigerants. And just one laboratory agreed to make the RE 700 analysis, and it cost between $200 and $300 per sample. So it is a reclaiming plant have a lot of samples. So it was impossible to afford. And yeah, so they can only use the portable identifiers to have the analysis of the sample. This is a very huge problem because a laboratory needs a gas chromatograph equipment, as you mentioned, needs with a mass detector, which is very, very expensive. So at least beginning with $50,000, an increasing amount. And also they need a quality assurance and quality control procedures, which increase a lot of the price. And what are your advice on this situation? Because we only have a portable refrigerants. That's my last point. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for sharing really hands-on experience and challenges in Chile. We'll react right away. We'll take the word from Zia.
Thank you, Ellen, and good afternoon, colleagues. We have been very delighted and informative presentations from the 2 presenters. In fact, most of the questions has been clarified. So I have 2 points to reiterate that in terms of Article 5, Article 7 countries, having a very good right national inventory of banks of used and unwanted ODS is very important. So we have to have this very proper, comprehensive inventory. And at the same time, Tina has already pointed out how we can think about very good incentives. You already alluded what would be the potential incentives the country can consider. But I will also pointed out about the voluntary markets. So the country itself can decide on which incentive can consider for them. Apart from the Montreal Protocol, we can go for other instruments under the Paris Agreement. But at the same time, in terms of, as you already pointed out, what would be the cost effective transitioning from the existing the mechanisms to the low global warming potential technologies. This is cost effective, or going for the recovery, recycle and reclaiming facility. So the country has to decide which will be the most cost effective for them to go further. But again, capacity building is very important, and as Article 5 countries, they have a lack of capacity, lack of equipments, the recovery equipments, and since I am from Bangladesh, so we are high volume countries. We have hundreds of thousands of workshops, technicians working out there, so they require a good number of equipments for recovery and eventually recycling and reclamation. So we need to have a deal, a package of deal for addressing this important issue effectively. Thank you.
Thank you. Sia? Yes.
Good afternoon, ma'am. Thank you very much for this very informative, enlightening session. From what I gather, you see, with increasing use of blends and with flammable, some of the refrigerants being flammable, the complexity of recovery, reclamation has only gone up. Now, with sophisticated technologies being required for reclamation, it's no longer garage technology. I mean, it's almost like setting up a refrigerant plant to be able to separate the components properly and being able to safely handle them, and then give confidence to the customers that what you are releasing from your site is as good and exactly as per the AHRI standards for reuse. In that scenario, I believe that rather than have small multiple sites in a country, it's good to have one proper site, maybe centralized, maybe run by the private sector, and that site has proper lab facility also to give the requisite confidence. That's my suggestion. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I take two more, and then I think we have to close the questions to enable answers. So it was here, and then Madame afterwards.
Thank you. Could you advise on the best practices on safely removing flammable refrigerants? And is there specialized equipment that is available in regards to that? Thank you.
Thanks. And
Thank you very much. The importance of LRM that has been highlighted, brought out very clearly in the presentations and the responses thereafter, and we do recognize that point. However, I would like to mention a few challenges which I think needs to be highlighted, especially from an Article 5 country perspective. So the challenges in terms of availability and accessibility of the required infrastructure, which includes the infrastructure required for testing of quality and purity of the refrigerants. The next point I would like to mention here is about the availability and adaptability of the technologies, particularly in the context of leak prevention, and the capacity building of the stakeholders which is required. That is also a challenge.
And at the same time, it's important that we do have the data collection of refrigerants from end-life equipment and a quantification of efforts required as well as an estimation of the financing which is required. It would be very important while we take this initiative forward. And I do have a question. I heard from the presentation that one of the important source could be the use of the carbon markets. Because it has been used very broadly in the presentation, I would just like to hear what exactly, when it comes to the details, the use of the carbon market. Is it the use of the resources from the carbon market which has been mobilized through the carbon market, or is it going to be an eligible activity? The point which we are making, recovery, recycling, and reclamation, is it going to be an eligible activity for the to be in the carbon market? So I just wanted to have some clarification on that. Thank you very much.
Thank you for all the different questions. I again invite our two panelists to answer. If we have enough time, hopefully for all the questions, but just as a heads up for the carbon market and also for the financing questions which have arrived several times, which are obviously very important. There's also a session this afternoon that is going to look in particular into financing and funding issues. But we'll see if we can also, from your experience as private company actors, I think also share a little bit of light on the experiences.
Thank you. Look, we acknowledge and recognize that it's very difficult, and it's not realistic or practical to be deploying laboratories in every location where reclamation occurs. So to your point, the Chilean NOU, I understand you said you've got some reclaim equipment. Is it actually that you've got recycling equipment? Because reclamation equipment can, in theory, deal with those azeotropic blends, the multi-components. So through distillation, separation, we can separate components. We can then bring them back to the ratio that they need to be at. Whereas when we're recycling, we don't actually have that capability. It's more about cleaning, removing the moisture, the oil, potentially bringing down the non-condensable gas. It's a slightly different process. So then if your component composition is slightly out, you're not going to be able to return it using that type of equipment. You need more sophisticated equipment. So I'm not overly familiar with what you have, but from what you've told me and your limitation, it sounds, pardon? It's more, yeah, exactly right. It's more a recycling activity as opposed to a reclamation activity. But then to your point about accessing testing and laboratories, it's going to be difficult because it's very costly. So my thoughts, and these are my personal views, my thoughts would be, have you entertained possibly taking your recovered product and seeing who else in the market would be interested in buying it off you to do reclamation and testing? And then if you had a requirement for that product to come back to you, entering into an arrangement where you can get that product back into your country after it's been reclaimed and tested and certified. So rather than you do all the heavy lifting in your own country with limited capacity, is there anyone else available outside of your country that could do it for you and then return the quantity that you require back to you? Is that an option? Is that something that could be considered? So therefore, that eliminates the need for you to invest in all that equipment, in that know-how, in that expertise. You leave it to an expert to do for you. Something to consider. I think one thing that we all have to be aware of is that we've got to be a bit creative in how we handle this situation, because there isn't a magic solution for everyone, because we've all got our unique limitations and challenges. So just having an open mind in how we can possibly tackle this situation?
Maybe I had something about the zero-tropic mixture for the reclamation and recycling. I speak about good practice since the beginning of this workshop that zero-tropic mixture, if you have good practice of recovery, there is no issue to recycling or reclaim it. You have to recover it on liquid. If you recover in gas, you have a decomposition of the blends, and it's not possible to recycle or reclaim. But if you are using good practice for the recovery, there is no issue. And about flammability of the equipment, to recycling, you have to secure the technician. So you have to use ATEX system. So it's more expensive than the non-ATEX system. But you have to check also the different threshold of flammability. A3, A2, A2L is not the same risk. It's not the same equipment. And in refrigeration, there is more than the A1 and A2L than the A2 or A3. A3 is usually the hydrocarbon, etc. And about leak detection also, I say step by step with the life of the installation to know the composition. But for leak detection also step by step. I know that it's not possible to have $200 to have leak detectors for all the technicians, etc. But for CFC and HCFC, you can use SWAP for the leak detection. And if you are using SWAP, you have a good detection also. It's not the same of electronic leak detectors, but it's the first step for the leak detection. And everybody has SWAP for this. And one thing also important to know that now for the equipment with R12, we know that some country made some dropping R12 to HFOs directly for the big equipment, not for the small, because you have to change oil, you have to change the joint, etc. But for the biggest equipment, it's possible to have a dropping directly to the CFC, to HFOs. So with a good technician, with a good training of the technician, you can mix everything on the recovery and avoid all the emission.
Just like to add on the flammable query that came up. It's not just about the recovery equipment, it's about having the right cylinders that are compatible for flammable refrigerants, the right valves. On the recovery equipment side, it's about having the right type of recovery equipment that is safe for handling flammables. And also the technicians need to be trained. We can't underestimate the importance of training technicians on the risks associated with handling flammables and also on the risks of mixing flammables with non-flammables and creating all sorts of cocktails. Labelling cylinders so that those that are in the supply chain that are then having to be exposed to those types of products and cylinders are aware of the risk. It's all related. So safety, starting from the technician right through to the last aspect of processing that product is equally important.
Okay, then I think we still have left the questions regarding cost effectiveness and then also a bit carbon markets, how exactly and what are the experiences or maybe also recommendations there?
I think with the question around carbon markets, it's probably best to leave that for the finance section of the sessions today. But basically the reason why I mentioned it in this forum is just to make people aware that there are mechanisms available outside of regulation that can also be leveraged to help LRM. And the experiences so far really relate more to the destruction of gas and how we can utilise the funds from carbon markets in that capacity, but probably best to ask more questions in that financing section.
Yes, but on carbon market, without lab, no carbon market also, because you have to prove that as you make the recovery, you recover the product, and you have to prove the composition of the waste. So it's the same. If you have labs, you can recommend recycling. If you have labs, you can use a carbon market to finance the ODS destruction. So it's more or less the same thing. It's a financial mechanism you have to find, to develop, but the key of the financial mechanism is the second life of the product for the recycling and reclaim. It's very important for this. And for ODS, it's true that there is no possibility of recycling or reclaim. I know that in some countries that they recycle and reclaim the CFC, but at the end we have to destroy them. That's why I speak about dropping on directly to the CFC, to the HFOs, not dropping to CFC to the HFCs, etc. There is some possibility today for the medium and big equipment to do that. So it's also a solution to avoid the emission and to have the best equipment for the future, because you can arrive to avoid also energy consumption on this by this way. So you have two topics, direct and indirect emission.
Thank you, Laurent and Elvira in particular, for all your expertise shared here for the presentation. Thanks to all the participants. We will come to a close. Just to highlight, I think, the main points, and there were lots of many different aspects mentioned. I think it was underlined, yes, the starting point, and maybe the most important point is the recovery. And recovery is a question of having cylinders, but it's also a question of setting up the proper infrastructure, because once you have it in the cylinder, it also has to go somewhere from there then for further treatment. And I think experience in several countries shows actually that there are RRR centers being set up, but then no refrigerant arriving, which is also not very efficient and not very helpful. So really to look at it in a systemic approach, have the capacity development for the technicians, have the incentives, have the policies in place. And then I liked what Laurent is saying, even though it's difficult to put it into numbers specifically, see it as an opportunity, not a cost. We know it's very costly, but please keep in mind, and I think we're all on the same track here, the cost of not doing it is probably much higher for all of us and for our countries than to invest now into, yes, the costly initial technologies to be acquired, and also in the lab analysis and so on. But let's do that. Let's find the funds. Let's listen to the session in the afternoon and contribute actively, and then get started, as was mentioned before. We invite you to keep really exchanging. There are lots of experience. Yes, every country is different, but still there are lessons learned. So I'll invite you also to do that in different forums, including the Climate and Ozone Protection Alliance. And for now, I wish you a nice lunch break. And then there are the different breakout sessions starting again at 2:30. You're invited to come back to this one, but you may also go and participate in one of the other ones. Thanks a lot.
the workshop after lunch.